Because the truth is, if you are someone in midlife who's feeling stuck where you're at, or discouraged, or just in a rut, you are actually totally worth the sacrifices needed to give you that time to rest and rejuvenate yourself and refocus on what's important to you. Welcome to the Love Your Brain podcast, the podcast designed for everyday people who are ready to hop off the negative thought hamster wheel and enjoy a less hostile environment in their own brains. Our brains are where we live our entire lives, and I'm on a mission to help people see that they have everything they need to make it a happier place to be. So join us for this episode of the Love Your Brain podcast. Let's get started. All right, welcome back, party people. Now, the topic we are discussing today is something that previously you may have heard only as it relates to college-age kids. And you'll often hear about kids that graduate from high school taking a gap year, a year in between when they graduate from high school and when they start college. And often they'll use this time to take a breather from schooling. And these kids will usually take some time and travel, maybe they'll volunteer, try some new things, just create some new experiences for themselves outside of what they've previously experienced before. It can be a really helpful season for kids in their journey of figuring out who they are, what they really want to do in their next season of life, especially with them entering a season where usually they have a little bit more ability to decide for themselves what that will look like. So I took this idea and I reinvented it for myself in midlife because honestly, I think in midlife, it's just as helpful. It's just as helpful to be able to find out who you are in this next season of life. And it's really important to take the time to figure out who you're going to be in that next season, just as important as it is when you're a young adult. Although for me, I shortened the time, knowing that by midlife, a lot of us have some responsibilities that make it challenging to take a full year. And if you're intentional about the time that you have, you can accomplish a lot in just a few months. So a few years ago, I took what I called a gap quarter. I traveled, I saw family, I took the time to wipe clean my slate of all of my routines and honestly some traps I had gotten into with my own brain, which I'll talk more about here shortly. But this gap quarter was probably one of the most impactful things I did for myself in midlife. I could not recommend it enough. It's a time when you can just take a break from virtually everything, at least professionally, or whatever your primary role is that you're playing, even if you're a stay-at-home parent, taking a break from that as well, and allowing yourself some rest, reinvention, and investment in yourself. Now, if I can guess, you might be listening to me right now and thinking, well, that's just not feasible for me. I can't do that. I have too many responsibilities, or financially, that would be too difficult for me. But hear me out and at least listen to this whole episode and then maybe decide if it still feels like it's not feasible for you. I'm not making any guarantees, but I can tell you that for our brains, when they can see and hear how others are doing something, it can often help your own brains make the connection that it might be possible for you too. Now, first, I'm going to explain the why and how of it all, and then I'll share some of the unconventional things I did with my own gap quarter. So, why is a gap quarter helpful? Well, it gives us a break from everyday routines, which honestly, by midlife, are often very set. They're probably been going in the same routine for quite a while. And although routine is great in some ways, it's not always great for personal growth. And as we talk about on this podcast, our brains are really built for efficiency. They don't change course easily. Our brains, when exposed to the same situations day after day, if left to their own devices, are usually just going to be producing the same thoughts over and over again, which creates a certain feeling in how we experience our life. So a gap quarter can be helpful to allow you to explore new thoughts, new beliefs, and just be able to see things a little bit different, which changes how you experience yourself, how you experience the world. It even can help you to start some new habits and see what you really want the second half of life to look like for you. This is super helpful if you feel like your life hasn't really ended up where you expected it to, or if you're feeling disappointed with the direction your life has taken, or if you're just feeling bummed out or stuck in a rut with the day-to-day life. When we get to that place, it can be really hard for our brains to give us thoughts that are any different than what we've experienced up to this point. And if we just continue to do the same old day after day, it can be challenging to make our brains think differently because we're just giving it that same exact stimuli, but hoping one of these times it will work differently. Now, of course, there's lots of different ways to do this, but for me, a gap quarter was really helpful in making this change happen. Your brain is just a machine. So if you want something different, we need to put something different into it so it can give you a different result. And that can be really hard to do when you're in a place in life when you're just bogged down with the chaos of life as it always has been for you. Also, taking time off can really allow your brain to stop those everyday thought loops that maybe have been causing issues for you. It can help you to create some new thoughts, especially if you use the time to create new experiences for yourself. When you're challenging yourself in new ways or trying something maybe you previously didn't think you had the time for. When your brain is not consumed with the everyday things that you have to get done and it has some space to think outside of the box a little, it can be seriously life-changing. One of the things about this is when kids are young, the gap year just makes sense, right? Because we think of young kids trying to figure out who they are and what they want to do in life. This is a good time to do it. But what I want you to hear is that it is just as important in midlife. You can still figure out who you are at this point. You can reinvent yourself in midlife. You can still decide to take a completely different path. The people you see out there living their best life later in life, they're not usually ones that have decided to just stick with what they've always done because it's familiar, because they're used to it. They're usually people that are out there taking risks on themselves, trying to figure out what really fills their cup. So that's another thing that a gap quarter can do for you is it can help provide the space you need to actually reinvent yourself. Figure out what you want that second half of life to really look like. So if this interests you, some key things I think are important to do in advance. One is to create safety for yourself. And this can be done a number of ways, also depending on what your gap quarter is taking a break from. What I mean by that is to have some kind of plan in place so that you have safety during this period. Now, if you're someone who's planning to take time off of work or time off of your career, that's creating a financial plan in place. Maybe saving up some money or finding a way to take out some expenses from your budget or finding a side gig for a bit. Whatever the case is for you, the idea is here that you are really creating safety by having a financial plan in place so you don't have to worry about the finances during this time. Now, if you're someone, maybe you are a full-time caregiver, maybe during this time you need to find someone else to fill your role. That's going to be a way that you create safety for yourself during this time, finding someone to fill those responsibilities so that when you're in your gap quarter, you don't have to be worrying about all those things being taken care of. And of course, if this isn't realistic in either of those scenarios for you to take 3 months off of, it doesn't feel doable for you, come up with a time frame that works best for you. 3 months tends to be enough time for your brain to truly start operating differently, but that's not to say a shorter time won't also benefit you in some ways. But regardless, you need to make sure things are taken care of enough while you take this time away from your responsibilities so that you can still feel safe during this time. Without that sense of safety, your brain won't be able to work on growing and changing and creating those new neural pathways because it will just be stuck in survival mode. So first step is creating safety for yourself financially or with other supports you need. Next is to put enough structure in place in your areas of weakness so that the gap quarter doesn't actually derail your goals. Now, I'll share here in a bit what that looked like for me, but we all know what our vices are. So we need to make sure that we are proactive in making sure that we don't sabotage this time we have. If you're someone who, without a lot of structure, you tend to go a certain route that's not helpful, maybe you have some not helpful behaviors that you fall into when you don't have a lot of structure, this is where we need to make a plan for how you prevent that from happening during this time. Having this time freedom can be incredibly helpful but it also can be a recipe for disaster if you're not proactively making a plan for bad habits you might fall into during this time, creating some sense of structure or boundaries that you might need so that you really can make the most of your time. Next, make a list of everything you want to use your time for, but keep it loose and open for new ideas and plans to come up. Once the clock starts, you want to make sure that you are hitting the ground running, having plans set to go in motion for what you want, or plan for specific ways you will put your brain in a place where it feels open and free enough to start thinking outside the box. And last but not least, have a loose plan for getting back to life when you're done. For example, if you're taking time off of your career, what's your plan to get back to bringing in income again at the end of the gap quarter? Do you have a list of things that you could always do again if you needed to? Or if you're taking time off of caring for others, how will you reintegrate when you're ready? What does that look like? Having that plan in place will actually help you feel safe and free during this time because you won't be worrying about, oh man, what happens on the other side of this? What am I going to do? What is that going to look like? Because again, you might end up just using your time to worry. So have that plan in place, at least loosely, of what it might look like to reintegrate back into your life again. So some of this may sound like, what the heck? I don't even know what that would look like. So I can share with you today how this worked for me. I decided to take this gap quarter after my youngest graduated high school. I was transitioning to having less responsibility at home with my kids, so that was something that was naturally transitioning for me. But I did end up resigning from my job. It was kind of a funny experience because a lot of people thought the position I was leaving was my dream job. Why would I leave my dream job? I was able to accomplish some really cool things at the time, so why would I give that up? But let me tell you, don't ever let those projections from others stop you. For me, that job was amazing, and I was working for an amazing company. It was such an honor to be able to hold the position. But I knew there were certain parts of my life I had really deprioritized during the years of hustling my career and raising kids, and I didn't want to move forward any longer before I had the chance to really re examine what I wanted this next season of life to look for me. Another thing I want to warn against in this season is being careful to balance this whole worst case scenario idea and not falling into the trap of a scarcity mindset. Thinking that whatever you have right now that's good, that if you let go of it, you won't ever find it again. That's not how the world works, my friends. It's just not. The world is freaking way more abundant than we give it credit for. You could have a career right now that's amazing, but that's not to say there isn't another amazing one out there. Now, obviously, you may not be able to just poof, recreate that same career again when your gap quarter is up, but I can assure you when you return back to life, you might feel a lot different about a lot of things. So don't let the fear of losing something good stop you from exploring what could actually be even better. So I did resign from my job. My spouse and I had saved up at the time, and we also cut back on some things so that we were able to maintain things financially. I also planned for the cost of some travel and something else that was huge for my gap quarter success, and that was the structure I put in place. About a month before I resigned, I found a personal trainer and I started working with them a few times a week because I knew once I wasn't working full time, the freedom in my schedule could mean I end up getting a little loosey-goosey with my eating, with my nutrition, and my activity. And I knew I also wanted to use my gap quarter to actually improve my health as well. So I knew I needed to get that in place before anything else. That structure, I truly believe, was one of the biggest game changers for me in terms of the results of my gap quarter. Not only did it help me feel physically able to do so many new things, it created new neural pathways in my brain that showed me I could do more than I ever realized I could. And I will say it's always easier for your brain to start a new habit when you have a new transition happening. It's really helpful to be able to pair those two together. So planning to start new habits during your gap quarter is a great time to implement something maybe that you've been wanting to try but didn't think you could stick to. I also planned a few trips, some to visit and reconnect with family, which was incredible because while working and raising kids, it has just been really difficult for me to take the time to spend with some special people in my life. My spouse at the time and I were also taking some road trips, had some cool experiences there as well. And I was also able to travel with my spouse on some work trips, which actually gave me a chance to have some new experiences in places while he would be working. And I could really just work through some things on my own. I also did something that might seem a little crazy to some, but I got back into acting and modeling after a 30-year hiatus. I hadn't done anything like that since I was probably 8 years old or so. But it was something in me that felt a spark coming back to try it again. So I got signed by a local talent agency and I went for it. I had some really amazing experiences. It truly was unexpected, I think, for a lot of people looking at me going into that. It's often unexpected for a woman to get into that type of work in midlife. But as someone who had been raising kids and working in the human services field, so much of me was in the background supporting others. And so it really was transformative for me to take a path where my brain was actually allowing me to be seen and to feel comfortable being seen. It honestly rewired my brain. Along with that experience, I also got into improv and took some improv classes at a local comedy club. And that too was just such a transformative experience for me. And here is something I want you to hear loud and clear. The things I tried during that gap quarter didn't end up necessarily being my main jam when I got back to life. For example, I'm not now a full-time comedian, but all of those experiences were the exact stepping stones I needed to get my brain to start working differently, which in the end did create huge changes in my outer life. Try not to set this bar for yourself that your gap quarter is the time when you'll get it all figured out. You might just instead have some experiences that open doors for you, where you start to slowly see your path unfold for you. And that's still huge. So don't tell yourself, I need to figure out everything by the time my gap quarter is up. No, your goal should be to simply allow yourself experiences that help your brain to start seeing new opportunities, have new thoughts, new beliefs about yourself and about the world around you. You are simply gathering the tools your brain needs to approach this next season of life more equipped for whatever path you choose, and that is exciting. And if you're wondering, I also did have a loose return to life plan, but it was very loose. Before I started my gap quarter, I had obtained a new life coach certification that I thought I could use to help financially, but also I knew I could go back into a traditional social work job at the end of the gap quarter if needed. And I had also explored just some random jobs during my gap quarter, like becoming a transcriber and a few other random ones. Some are things that I still do today, some were a total no-go, and that's fine. But along with that, at the time, we were also considering downsizing since the kids were starting to move out. And so it was kind of a twofold plan for returning back to life. And that's another thing. I think people think we should always be working on the goal of increasing our income because that makes sense. And that feels like we're achieving something. But sometimes, in fact, minimizing or downsizing is just as huge and can impact your quality of life in even more powerful ways. Finding out that you need less space, less stuff, and opening things up with the same amount of income so you can have more freedom with your time, more ability to enjoy your life can be equally as gratifying in some ways. And I would actually argue for long-term satisfaction might actually give you a greater return on investment. Now, I will say my gap quarter ended up lasting longer than anticipated, and I ended up on a few different paths before I actually ended up working back at the company I resigned from, but in a different capacity. That is probably a better fit for me. And I feel completely different about a lot of things these days, and that includes how I see and experience my 9 to 5 job. I also have a few side gigs that absolutely fill my cup, and I know I would not have tried them without doing what I did during my gap quarter. So when it comes to earning income, I feel differently about how I make money these days than I did before my gap quarter. And that is huge in terms of my mental health and in terms of how my brain works. But most importantly, I can say that I see myself completely different today than I did before my gap quarter. I feel so capable, so much more free, and a lot more fulfilled in ways that I never expected. And honestly, my life personally took a whole different turn after my gap quarter. I didn't expect it all, but I don't think I would have had the tools to navigate it all without the time I took to focus on myself during my gap quarter and really get reconnected to who I was and what I wanted in life. So, hopefully, this episode has given you some information to think on and see if it's something you might want to start planning for. Because the truth is, if you are someone in midlife who's feeling stuck where you're at, or discouraged, or just in a rut, you are actually totally worth the sacrifices needed to give you that time to rest and rejuvenate yourself and refocus on what's important to you. Have a great week, guys. I hope you found something helpful here today on the Love Your Brain podcast. Maybe a laugh or a feeling of validation, or maybe just a few moments to have company while you do your laundry. Whatever you take from it, I hope you enjoyed your time and leave feeling empowered to be more you every day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next episode, and leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Have a great one.